All right. So, John is here. Hi, John.
Hello, are you able to hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Yep.
Yes. John Mayberry is the Enterprise Architecture Director, Business Technology Strategy for PNC. And I'll tell you how I met John. He was kind enough to come and speak to the undergraduate EA club, a couple in January?
January 19th.
Okay, in January, and I had the good fortune of sitting down and at a table. We had you always have to feed undergrads, especially undergrads. So we fed them and first, and then I was able to sit at a table with John and got to talking with him. I wasn't able to attend his presentation because I had to come back here and have class with you all. So he ran through his presentation with me, and I said, hey, how about coming to speak? Well, not coming, but joining our class to speak about, I think it's business architecture, so capability planning, right? And he agreed. So I'm just going to turn it over to you. I will give you the presenter rights.
Okay.
John, you've
Great.
got them now.
Perfect. So, given the conversation I just kind of listened in on, I think there's clearly some understanding of enterprise architecture within the class attendees. So, what I wanted to do tonight is really focus on a particular application of business architecture at PNC and the framework that we're using, and kind of walk through a specific example. And I'm pretty informal with these things, so if you have a question or want to kind of pause as we go through, feel free to just ask a question in the public chat, and we can kind of take it as we go through. So with that, I just wanted to kind of frame very briefly what it is that we're generally trying to accomplish, at least some of the things from the EA program at PNC right now. And then I'll tie this back into how we're using and applying the business capability framework. So I'm pretty informal with these things, so if you have a question or want to kind of pause as we go through, feel free to just ask a question in the public chat, and we can kind of take it as we go through. So with that, I just wanted to kind of frame very briefly what it is that we're generally trying to accomplish, at least some of the things from the EA program at PNC right now. And then I'll tie this back into how we're using and applying the business capability framework. So at the moment, anytime we're evaluating key technologies coming in, or key capabilities that we're trying to deliver on, a couple of the things that we've been asked to look at or focus on are the ones listed here. And these are not exhaustive. There's certainly other aspects, and architects are good at kind of linking things. So you could talk about risk instead of cost. You could talk about revenue and so forth. But for now, we're looking at compliance, and compliance for us comes into a couple of things. Being in a heavily regulated environment within the banking industry, we have to be sensitive to particular compliance requirements. Compliance can also mean compliance to technology standards, but even with the discussion that you guys were just having, our outside regulators and so forth are looking to EA to provide a lot of the controls and governance for the organization when it comes to adopting what our standards are within technology or for business solutions. Also, we're looking at reliability, generally looking how we're warranting that services are really going to be there to meet the business needs and ensuring the value that is being sought out after those. From an agility perspective, we're looking at how do we react or plan to take in change more quickly and adapt. And then finally, cost is always a key component, and the flip side of that being the revenue side as well. So, looking at TOGAF, just one real quick thing as we focus on this. When we want to talk about architecture, there's the different domains from a business side, data, application, and technology. And when we're looking at a capability, one of the things that we focus on is that the capability is not unique to just one of those domains, but to have a fully fleshed out capability, it crosses over them generally. So as we go through this and we talk about business architecture in particular with this, we're going to be looking at things around the strategy, how we're governing the decisions that we're making from a business investment side on our business capabilities, impacts to the organization, and impacts to the business processes. And then the other domains certainly play into that and build up, and we'll kind of address that as well. So this slide here is one of my favorite ones because what I can say is the first day I walked into the EA department at PNC, the department had sat me down and he told me I was going to be the lead architect for working around the Basel compliance and solutions that we are subject to because of the size of the bank. And he showed me this. And what I'm proud about is that I didn't just turn around, walk out the door, and quit. So what you're looking at here was somewhat affectionately called the Go Blind wall chart. And if you can imagine, this was printed out on about 6-7 feet wide poster that was probably about 5 feet tall. Even at that size printed out, all the writing on the side, which is specifying certain key system inputs and the processes and all the codes that are listed throughout this chart, were barely readable. So with that, the reason I bring it into this discussion is this is a very process-focused view of our systems. And when you look at it, and I sat down through the meetings that we had with the different process owners, it was very unwieldy and very difficult to actually use. They would literally take pieces of it and they would highlight it with a marker, and then they would take the business process owners that had to confirm that it had been properly captured, and that we were documenting the controls and where the data was flowing and so forth so that we managed the risk. Those meetings were very, very difficult to get through and very challenging to be accurate in. And when you look at this, it kind of becomes clear why. So what I wanted to introduce is a totally different approach around the capability model and why that really does help. So when we talk about capability model, there's a couple of I'll call it simplified examples that I like to walk through that kind of differentiate between the two. So if you talk about physical architecture, and I know a lot of architects, enterprise architects will like to make that literal comparison. Let's talk about then town planning versus route planning. So let's assume that you're in a town, a small town, and you have to go run errands to get things done. And you need to go grocery shopping, you maybe need to go pay some bills, and so forth. So as you start outlining what you need to do for that, you might figure out, well, I've got to go to the post office, buy some stamps. Then I need to go to the bank, I need to take out some money. Then I need to go to the grocery store and do my shopping. Maybe I need to drop off some dry cleaning and so forth. So if you start thinking about it in terms of tasks and what you need to accomplish, you might come up with sort of a route-based or a process-based plan. And you may try and optimize that. One of the things that is helpful when you're having to make business decisions is to simplify your model to the level that you can to still effectively make your business decision. So now if you're planning a town and doing the sort of planning that a city planner might do, they're generally not going to think about things in terms of an individual going through a process. Instead, they're going to say, well, our town needs a way to provide food. We need a grocery store, maybe two. Our town needs a way to provide postal services. Maybe, that's the post office. Maybe it's the fact that you can buy stamps at the grocery store at an ATM. The town needs a way to do banking. So that could be at the bank, or maybe you also have specialized ATMs, or maybe, again, the grocery store allows you to get cash out. When you start thinking about it in terms of capabilities and what capabilities you have to apply, you also start getting a little bit more of a vision of where you might have overlapping capabilities or where you might have specialization and so forth. So that's one of the key differences. So just real quick to kind of get everyone locked in on the same kind of definition of a capability. Pulling again from the open group, one of the things that I would put out there for everyone to keep in mind is a capability is complete in the sense that there's the people dimension. There's really has to be the understanding of what the people are doing. That could be from training, that could be professional licensing and certifications, things like that. There's the process, which is generally what kinds of things are you requiring to do? What kind of information might you need to collect and so forth? And then the material dimension, which is the nuts and bolts, the infrastructure, maybe the equipment, it could be the software. All of those together would then enable or provide an organization or an enterprise to have a capability. You may find them at different levels. There may be very manual processes that don't really focus as much on the technology, or they use it in a very suboptimal way. You may have ones that are highly automated, in which case the people dimension may be focused on those maintaining the systems. But in general, you're going to find all three of those involved. The other thing on a capability-based framework is you can think about it two ways, both vertically and horizontally. So at an enterprise level, you would say, I have a capability that needs to be consumed or provided across the whole enterprise. So I heard Sarbanes-Oxley being mentioned earlier in the presentation. And as a sort of a risk-based and financial reporting-based regulation, that really cuts across the entire organization. In IT, there's certain requirements for that, certainly within the business and within reporting. It's not unique to just one particular function of the organization. It may be the same thing for, say, electronic service delivery as another example. In addition to that, you could also say there may be flavors of things in the different parts of the organization as well. So if we talked about the capability around lending, what you might need to do for providing a value for an asset for lending may vary. If you're doing mortgages, the valuation and risk management around a house is going to be very different than what you might do, say, around an automobile. And if you're doing an auto loan, the valuation of the collateral there is very different. And yet again, if you're looking at, say, security trading and margin trading and what collateral may be necessary there, again, very different. All of them at an enterprise level may be dealing with risk, with valuation, and so forth, but you may still find a vertical specialization. All right. So one of the advantages that you have in a capability approach is you can start collecting certain types of metrics or indicators, might be a better way of how things. So you might say, I need to look at in a particular capability or function that my enterprise or my business is doing, tell me what I'm at risk at because of obsolescence. Maybe you can give me a sense of, given a particular capability, how many applications are providing that capability. That might give you a sense of possible ability to rationalize, which cost is a factor, but so is consistency. If you're thinking about where you might have, let's say you had, and I'll use a real world example from PNC. Years ago, we had a customer relationship management system that was for our retail customers and a separate one for our wealth management customers. In essence, they were the same. They were, in fact, were actually the same vendor product, but they were two different instances, and the teams managed them differently, and they were set up as two different systems. We ultimately combined those, and it really was not just a cost aspect, but also to bring a uniformity and a consistency to the customer experience. So from a business perspective, there were other drivers as well that came into that. Looking here to the right, what I'm showing here is actually borrowed from the Technology Business Management organization. That's a group that was sort of spearheaded by a company called Aptio that does financial costing and transparency for IT. Specifically, what they looked at is a model where they said if you start with your generic business capabilities of your organization and you define them as being created by different business services or different services that make them up, and those in turn are created by technology services and inputs, and then you can start getting down to the lower level of hardware, software, labor, and so forth, and then you can break it down and eventually get down to where you're looking at your general ledger. When we looked at this, and this is something that we've been actively looking at to really understand where we're spending our money and where we're earning our money from a business service perspective, and then what is required to support it. The thing that came across here at the first step was this business capability layer in order to organize it at the top level. So I'll come back to that one. So what we actually did at PNC is we adopted a industry-specific capability model. And the one we selected was the Banking Industry Architecture Network Organization's model. Anyone who's interested can go out to buyin.org. There's a lot of information that's publicly available, even if your organization is not a member. And we even have banks that will download a lot of the templates and information that's created. And if you're in another industry, say the insurance industry, and there's some others around manufacturing, there are other standard industry capability models to be looked at and potentially used. So banking being the industry that I'm currently working in, this is the banking one primarily. IBM has another one. We selected this because it's vendor neutral. And then I will not hesitate to say the chairman of the board for Buyin just happens to be our chief technology and chief operating officer at PNC as well. So let's just say he thought we made the right decision as well to adopt Buyin. With that, just a little bit to give you an orientation on this, the boxes that are in yellow, and I realize it's a little difficult to read on here because of how scrunched down it is. Each of those is called a service domain, and what it represents is a unique, non-overlapping business capability. And the way they arrived at that is they have a whole sort of definition that says there's certain assets, as they would refer to it, or objects, business objects, things that you need to look at. And with that, there's then certain operations that you're doing. So they took the assets or the business objects that we would have at a bank, and they broke them down to where they were mapped uniquely. And then those had a set, those operations or services acting on it then were associated to it. So there's about 280 of those. And the business domains are just sort of generic segments that are defined, so they're related ones. And then the business areas, again, are just a higher level. The only thing Buyin says that you can't change are the service domains, the yellow boxes. You can arrange it and reorganize them any way you want as far as they're concerned. So I see a couple of questions. So FIBO was one of the ones. I'll just go back and reiterate that our CTO, COO was the chairman of the board for Buyin. So whatever consideration we gave to something else, I'll say there was a strong proclivity to adopt this particular one. And at the time, we didn't have any others. If anything, I think the alternative we would have looked at, because we had adopted the data warehouse model from IBM, would have been looking at IBM's business model. But I see someone also pointed out the insurance one as a cord. There's a second one. I don't remember the name of it, but there are at least two different insurance ones that I have come across as well. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about specifically what we're getting out of Buyin and a couple of the things that you may find when you go out to the website and kind of how we're implementing it. So if you think of the Buyin landscape that we saw on the prior slide, each of those service domains is really kind of like the periodic table of the elements. They're unique and non-overlapping. What Buyin provides are a series of templates and mechanisms by which you can use those to then start creating definitions of business scenarios and processes. And I'm going to walk through at a high level one of those we do. One of the other things to keep in mind is the concept of a service domain in Buyin will allow you to have a lot of internally managed things that are hidden or black boxed from the rest of the organization or outside of that service domain. So instead it defines boundaries. It says there are certain services offered and certain services consumed. Now anyone who's really come across SOA can certainly start seeing where this would start leading you in that direction as an organization. I will tell you that while this would align well with a SOA strategy, it is not complete in and of itself to get you there, nor does it require you to fully go that direction in order to get value out of it. So when you think about each of the service domains and the fact that they have defined inputs and outputs, what you can then do is, in essence, start defining a business process by linking them up. And you may find certain ones may repeat, which is perfectly acceptable. But again, it starts allowing you to think about more modular approaches. Now, I'll say again, this is not a technology only view. These also can be viewed from a business perspective. So, for example, in the banking industry, you have the idea of a credit bank versus a servicing bank. Some banks will do both, where they might offer a loan and service it. Other banks may only do one or the other. So if anyone's done a mortgage where you applied at one place, say Quicken Loans or something like that, they did everything for you, and then a month or 2 months into your loan, you suddenly get a notice saying it's been sold and someone else owns it now. You've probably come across this situation. Likewise, PNC for many, many years, and one of the reasons why we did so well during the 2008 period is we were not in the mortgage business, but we were servicing other people, other banks' mortgages instead. Again, this kind of model would allow you to define what are the core functions or capabilities that you need as a servicer, as opposed to one who's actually underwriting the credit risk. So now let's kind of talk about what it means in the real world and how, if you're starting in an organization, you might start trying to apply it. If you were to go and map your applications into what services or capabilities they're providing, and then kind of box those out, you may end up with something very similar to this representation I have here. And what that would mean is where something overlaps, you probably have an application that is in essence offering services in two different areas, or providing sort of those overlapping functions. And what that means most often is you also have examples of where systems are doing point-to-point connections. Things are not sort of working along defined service boundaries, but they're going more deeply into the internal workings of a domain. The challenges with that, of course, is the more tightly you have those coupled, the more difficult it is to make changes or to shift some of the business decisions and implement them. In essence, when you start having those clean boundaries, it also starts empowering you to be a little bit more agile. So realistically, what you may end up having to do is simply carve out an area that defines a service domain and just worry about breaking those overlaps around the service domain. But perhaps internal to the service domain, that might not be a day one or an initial key concern. What you would be focused on is anything that, at least from that point on, that touches the service domain only interacts with the particular boundaries that are permitted. So going back to the somewhat simplified or abstract view of the process diagram, what you would then do is something very similar. You would carve out a section of that and, in essence, start saying, okay, I can't necessarily take on everything at once, but what I can do is figure out all the things that then touch the service domain and the processes in it and start restricting them to just those key points. Once you start doing that, then you can start independently making some changes in improvements internal to that without necessarily affecting the larger environment in which you're working. Or potentially you may find you could just swap out an entire domain with another product or outsource it to another company or a service. So I want to take you through a particular working example where we use this for a vendor solution. And the core thing I want you to think about here is the competing priorities with a lot of vendors against enterprise architecture and business architecture. What we really would like is the structure in only using what we need to use. The vendor wants to have a large market and a large audience that they're selling to, so they want to throw everything they can into their product and hope something sticks. So what we did is we looked at a solution around our payments processing and a payments engine. So we took that landscape of 280 some service domains from buy-in. Again, keeping with buy-in, we can arrange them any way we want. And we kind of have it in a value chain here. And we said, of those 280, these are the ones that are in some way or fashion involved in what we're looking at. So this is what we want to focus on. We then, and I'll get to it in the next slide, color-coded those to mean different things. So to take a more simplified view, we color-coded these are the same ones we just saw, and we just generically listed the ones that said, those that are absolutely core and fundamental to what we're looking at, we listed as in scope for the evaluation. We then listed the items that they integrated with directly, and so we had to be aware and deal with those, but we weren't really trying to replace or change those if we could avoid it. Finally, there were other things that were involved, but in a more indirect way. So if we were to do a business scenario, they were involved. So here's a template where we took each of those domains, and what we did is we lined them up in essence, a sequence diagram that just said, here's the steps that we have for a particular business scenario. And we kind of described those, and you see it jump back and forth between those domains because the function that's being described is one that domain is accountable for. But what this allows us to do is then, as we defined our business scenarios, it helped us figure out what was on the prior slide. Again, what's core, what's involved, and what's interfaced. You were then able to go in and start doing some particular value evaluations on those functions as well. But the next step is once you have your business scenarios, or the key ones you're looking at, anytime, and I'm going to jump back and forth for a second, anytime you have two of these that were connected, what you would find is there's an interface that's assumed to be required. And it could be a business one or a technical one. And when you start overlaying multiple business scenarios for what's involved in what you're looking at, you end up, in essence, with this simplified capability wireframe. All this is simply doing, this no longer tells you your individual scenarios, but what it does tell you is between, for instance, payment order and settlement delivery management, there is an ongoing function between the two that's related. And I now need to anticipate or deal with that. And likewise, you can do it for is again a view that's a little bit higher level, but it gives you enough information to start making different types of business decisions, what kinds of things are really core, what things are again related or interfaced and then related. This also would then provide some guidelines to what might be your roadmaps and transition states. So now I know when I replace the product with whatever is going to be in green, I'm probably going to be impacting the items in light blue. And then there's probably some data or other integration testing involved in what's in the yellow. We then took the products from the vendors and the things that were key and interfaced, and we started looking at, did they cover it? Did they cover it well? If they covered things beyond that, then we actually asked, do we have to use it? In other words, if they covered something back like in the blue, and we already had a solution for that, we actually challenged them and said, hey, can we not use it? Or by going to your product, are we forced to also now deal with this other function being replaced? So that was actually a very successful exercise for us. We had our business partners as well as our technology partners working with us in EA to go through that. It also kind of helped because when you looked at that buy-in landscape, and I think you find this a lot with some of those larger capability models, they don't resonate very well with your business partners. But once you put them in something like this wireframe, it suddenly makes sense to them. It helps them focus and see the context to which they're looking at. So with that, we, as I described, kind of applied the rigor, and it helped keep everyone focused on what they needed to say looked at versus to not be distracted with. And in the end, if nothing else, I really wanted to get across to our business partners and those evaluating not to get distracted by the things that we didn't really need, because in the end, those were really kind of pitfalls for us to fall into in the evaluation. So with that, that's the end of the presentation, I believe. Let me check on my other screen here. Yep. So I'll open it up to any questions from the class.
Yeah, I'll start with a question. I'm just curious as to how long it took you to go through to basically produce that one slide you had where kind of the kind of go back a slide or two.
The wireframe?
Yeah, this. Because I mean, this is a very abstract perspective that is very valuable to understanding kind of the componentization of your enterprise. But it's kind of like I'm currently working as a software engineer, and it's like to get to this is such an abstraction from what we see today, on a daily basis of, kind of core IT stuff. And so it's
so here's a couple of things.
How did you envision this? How did you envision this, and how long did it take you to get to this point?
Okay, so the answer is for us, it probably took them a good 2 months. And part of that was because there's a lot of education that was going on with the business. But there's a couple of things that are foundational that you have to keep in mind. You cannot get to this until you already had, let me go back a ways. And until you have something like this, it's very difficult to do that. So we were not starting from scratch because we had all the work that was involved in this. And this took, this probably was a good 8-9 years in the working here of buy-in as an organization, which is a volunteer organization of different banks and vendors. And I go probably twice a year to Europe for the global meetings, and then we have meetings a couple times a year in person in North America, and then several going on now. So this is fairly stable. It doesn't change. The last change from version 3 to version 4 deleted, I think, 2 service domains, added a new one, and renamed a couple, but they were merely clarifications. So it's fairly stable, and because all of the work and effort that went into this, we were able to go from here to defining, all right, this. And again, the value here is we didn't just make these up. These were ones where we picked mechanical definitions of the capabilities. And then we were able to start with our business scenarios, defining which ones were key and not. So if you don't have sort of that base landscape, it's going to be very difficult. So this is a situation where if you're in this industry that has one, or there's a vendor that sells one that would work for you, that's where you're going to need to start, or you're going to find most of your work is going to be churning at this level, because you won't have the sort of uniqueness of the defined capabilities and their boundaries. That's where I think you'd have the trouble. But given that, it took about 2 months to define this. And again, you start with the business scenarios. And what we did is the business would just write them in the way they understood. And then we as architects and business architects would sit down and we would help them map them back into the defined service domains. And so where they might have the same thing called out 3 or 4 different ways, we'd ask them about it. And when it got down to it, we'd say, well, it's really the same thing. It might be a slight variation, but let's simplify it to this domain. And that, again, took us to here. And once we got to that, as you said, it's really showing you a simplified enough view to make the decision. Because again, if all you had were 40 spreadsheets or sequence diagrams, it's very hard for a human being to consume all of this in a meaningful way, as opposed to something you can kind of look more at a glance. And I think that's one of the key values for what we do. Other questions?
Michael makes a comment. Michael, you want to talk?
Sure. We just went through like a bit of the business objective type work, or doing current view and future view type work for EAs. And it's interesting to see how I think you're doing the current view, or at least adjusting your view to match a standard, paid off when you had to go do an initiative. It was relatively quick to go put something together.
So I guess there's a couple of things that come into play there. So what you're seeing here is not a technology view. This is a business view. Now there's technology that you could drill down into, like what applications are in here. So I just want to make sure when we talk about current view versus future state, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it's much more stable at the business view than it is at the technology view. So when you're at this level, putting that effort in is giving you the framework to then evaluate or show impacts and risks and potential other decision points where the technology is supporting these business functions come into play. It's certainly something where we have taken at PNC an effort where we use a tool called True, TROUX, which I refer to as an EA business intelligence tool. And in that, we have loaded the buy-in capabilities, and we have already gone through and done at least some preliminary mapping of all of our applications to what are the business functions the application is providing, so that we can then say, when I look at the business capabilities, show me what are the business apps providing it. And then by extension, our CMDB can then tell us, and what are the technologies supporting those business apps, which are supporting these business functions. And it starts really pulling the pieces together for that. Now when we have that, what we're able to see are things like if we're looking at changing our payment engine like this, then we can very quickly go back and say, these are the key systems that are going to be involved. These are the key teams organizationally that we need to pull in. And it also starts giving a little bit more insight into the scale and the risks and the potential upside and downsides of it. Other questions, comments?
What was the name of the tool again?
True, Troux. They were just recently purchased by a company called PlanView. Other systems in the same line would be things like Alphabet. Does a similar function for EA. There's a couple others out there. Sparks is a little bit different, but it plays into that a little bit. So I see a question on the process. So the processes are mapped to the capabilities. This is thing that we're still kind of working with. So this is a process here or a business scenario. And if you want to think about it, you could get to different levels of detail. So you could have processes that are highly, highly detailed. I would only ask if someone's doing that they have a good reason for it. So again, it's very easy to fall into the trap to detail out something to the nth degree, but in the end, you really didn't need to for the decision you might be faced with. What you have here is really a higher level process, and one of these boxes could probably be broken down into smaller pieces or steps. But for what we were evaluating, this was enough. I am actively right now working with our process teams at PNC because we're looking at how we effectively start managing our service hierarchy, our capability map, and then the processes which we use for risk analysis so that they're linked, because all of them ultimately should map to the same capabilities. And we didn't want to have our risk team and business continuity team roll up to some other capability map, and then our finance team roll up to a different one for costing, and then EA use a different one. So right now we're standardizing on buy-in across the board, and certainly the process pieces are at the forefront of what we're working on this year and probably into a good part of next. Other questions?
So I have a follow-up question. If I don't want to be the question hog, but I do have a follow-up question. So quite honestly, how did you learn how to do this type of enterprise modeling or enterprise, whatever it is that you're doing here, right?
Oh,
because I mean,
the best way anyone does it, we stole it. So to be honest, a lot of work had been done in how you would approach this, at least at a conceptual level, by buy-in. Now, buy-in, again, is largely made up of architects who are just getting together trying to work through this from the banking. And it's largely been focused out of Europe right now. But we partnered with the lead architect from buy-in. His name is Guy Rackham. And we actually had him come to PNC and work with us on this because they had the templates for the business scenarios, but they really didn't have that concept of a wireframe yet. So we worked on that together with them to kind of go through and create that. And it was really to serve the need of trying to simplify it out. And we just recognized that you're able to kind of overlay processes on top of each other this way and start getting a little bit more of a view from that. But yeah, it's like anything in IT or most other industries. You kind of build on, what others have done.
Great. Anybody else? I realize it's after 7. I mean, at 7 minutes after 9. This was a great presentation, John. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with my students and me. And, you know, as you can see, you're getting your accolades over there in the chat panel. So I just really appreciate your time. Is it all right if I post these slides for my class to refer to?
I have permission from our corporate communications department.
Great.
There's nothing confidential in these, so you're welcome to post away.
All right.
And again, at buyin.org, folks can go there and get some more information for the publicly available pieces as well. And if anyone's interested in Pittsburgh in November, the week after Thanksgiving, is going to be the next Buy-in North American meeting. The first day of that is always an introduction day, and it's open. So people who are interested in just learning more about it and hearing from the chief architect at Buy-in, who would be speaking that day, we'll host it at PNC, but it is open. You just have to go to the Buy-in website and sign up. After the first day, you have to be a member, but for the first day, that one's available.
That's nice. Thanks for that information.
Yeah. And then I see, where are we located and are we hiring? I'm in Pittsburgh. Yes, I'm hiring, and you don't have to live in Pittsburgh.
Nice.
All right.
Your contact information is on the beginning of the slide, right?
It is, and I am on LinkedIn as well.
That's great. That's great. Well, thanks again. I hope you'll come back and do this in the future. It's been very informative, and you're a very good speaker, John.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everyone. I'll be in touch and see you back here next